Attention, please. Eastern Airlines Flight 19, now ready for departure.
Welcome aboard the Walt Disney World Express monorail. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're entering the vacation kingdom of the world.
There's enough land here to hold all of the ideas and plans we could possibly imagine. We call it Epcot. Will be our experimental prototype city of tomorrow.
Welcome to another episode of the Retro Disney World Podcast, taking you back to the vacation kingdom of the world, the way it was, and the way it is in your memories.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 31 of the Retro Disney World Podcast. This episode is Mission to Mars, where we're going to be taking you back to Flight to the Moon and Mission to Mars and Tomorrowland in the early 70s into late 70s and 80s. So with that, as always, I'm your host, Todd McCartney, and sitting in with me tonight is Mr. Brian P. Miles from Pennsylvania. How are you tonight, Brian?
Yeah, hello from the Keystone State, where we have these warm summer evenings and fireflies outside, and it's just a lovely time of year.
Warmed up.
Do you guys all have fireflies? I know there are parts of the country that do not, which was news to me.
Well, they can't answer yet. I haven't introduced them, so you want to wait to the end?
I'm sorry, folks.
You can. That's all right. And from Ohio, Mr. JT Kuzier tonight. How are you, sir?
Good. How's it going?
All right.
JT, do you have fireflies in Ohio?
Yeah, we don't really refer to them as fireflies, though. Like glow bugs, that sort of stuff. And then you smash them and rub them on your arm as a kid, so your arm glows.
That sounds about right for Ohio.
Yeah. So we have a few in here in New Hampshire, but when we were growing up in New Jersey, we called them lightning bugs.
Oh, that's what they're called. Lightning bugs.
Yeah. Lightning bugs. Yeah.
Lightning
Yes.
bugs. Yeah.
So, and
I was going with the summer magic, burr lives, fireflies, but who else is on the show with us tonight, Todd?
Well, yeah, let's check in with our investigative reporter on the entomology section of Tampa. All the way in from Tampa is Mr. Hal Bowers tonight. How are you doing tonight, Hal?
Good evening, Todd. I'm coming to you live from the entomology wing of the Tampa Bug Fest.
No, we have no fireflies here, to my knowledge. I think there might be a couple in Central Florida, but we're mostly fireflyless.
I think that's where I found the conversation to occur, was talking to some folks who live by the parks in Florida, and they were like, what's a lightning bug?
Yeah.
Really?
There's some fake ones in jars that fly around, like in the Country Bear Jamboree.
Yeah.
Or someplace.
And I thought some in the Bayou scene in Disneyland and Pirates of the Caribbean. There's some.
Oh yeah, that's the most famous.
Those are the ones they're on fans. It's pretty cool.
The grain of wheat.
So Californians who listen to us, do you have them out there?
That's right.
That's a good question. You have to let us know. So outside of Disneyland,
send all your entomological questions to podcast at RetroWDW.com. So,
and what color are their butts? Are they?
They're always like a yellow amber.
Yeah. See, I thought there were some green.
There
ones
are green. Yeah, there are some light green ones. Yes.
Are they the Christmas ones?
Could be. They're painted for the holidays.
So thanks for tuning in to the Retro Bug World podcast.
That's right. Taking you
That's
back.
great. We'll see you next time.
All right. Well, it is time.
Brian, take us out.
Yeah. It's time that we jump into our corrections and comments, as always. BJ Major wrote in and talking about our last month's episode, which was where we took you back to the grand opening of Walt Disney World, as well as a whole bunch of other different television specials we spoke of. And she wanted to tell us a little bit extra information about Meredith Wilson's appearance. As we talked about, he was in there and directed the band and the concert at the end, but he actually was the one that directed the 76 trombones, and he was in apparently he was in some sort of small gazebo that they pulled the head of all the trombones at the end, and which is kind of neat. And he was also in 1959 he was in a band, or directed a band, I should say, at Disneyland. So there were definitely some more connections there from Meredith Wilson. And so it's pretty cool. So thank you, BJ. Appreciate you writing in. And she also wrote in, along with Tim Hare, about a correction that Brian, we misspoke about, or you misspoke about a specific person in the Epcot special.
So when I listened back to the episode, even before we did the QA and released it, I knew I had gotten this wrong as soon as I heard myself say it on the show, and I'm like, oh, no. So I had misidentified when I was going through some of the promotional films that they showed for Epcot and Spaceship Earth. I said that Isaac Asimov was talking to the Imagineers, and I meant Ray Bradbury. So BJ and like 5 or 6 other people all felt it necessary to call my attention to it, and I appreciate that. Yes, I absolutely know that was Ray Bradbury, and now so do all of you.
That's right. So
I was going to say something at the time because I knew, and
absolutely, I figured you would have.
It's one of the laws of robotic corrections,
That's
I
right.
believe.
That's right. And we have a bit of, I guess, retro news. How this one I'm going to send over to you regarding the original 20K sub narration has been located, huh?
On our 20K sub episode, we talked about how there was a version of the sub narration that was previous to the one that we became accustomed to. That we were tipped off by Plastic Seaweed on Twitter, but there was no evidence of it, and lo and behold, about 2 or 3 weeks later, after we aired that episode, I believe it was Widen Your World, Mike Lee's website and also Facebook page, actually published a audio copy of the original narration, which I believe was recorded by a guy that sent him a bunch of recordings who was blind. So he went to Walt Disney World in the early years with a gigantic tape recorder and recorded all kinds of stuff. So it is out on YouTube. We will put a link in the show notes, and you can go listen to the original narration and hear the differences. And it's quite an amazing coincidence that after all these years, it finally popped up. So it's very cool.
And then, that's a great segue in here. Mike Frank wrote to us and says he loves the podcast, and he says he feels it's the best. Well, appreciate that, Mike. We think we're the best too. So he's a huge fan of Retro Epcot, and he said he's listened to our Listen to Land episode a dozen times, but how, in keeping with the recording, he says he would like us to do a show called Tales of the Styrofoam Head and play all the 360 audio that was recorded with the equipment from Radio Shack. I want to hear Horizons.
Well, Horizons is out on my personal website, kingdomofmemories.com, so he can hear it there. But you know what? It would be great to do a show where we go over some of that audio, because that would be really fun, and it would bring it to this group, which I know there may or may not be crossover between our listeners and people that happen to wander around to our website. So that would be good. And you know what? We're talking about doing Horizons this year, so there'd certainly be some opportunity to play some of it during the Horizons episode.
Would you say that topic is on the horizon?
Yes, it's there. And for those of you who don't visit Howe's site, kingdomofmemories.com, on a regular basis, we are now starting to syndicate his publications, his articles and music and such on the RetroWDW.com. So going forward, anything that he posts on his site will come over as a syndicated feed on RetroWDW.com. We tried to get the old stuff and pull it over, but Howe's site wanted nothing to do with that. So we worked hard, folks. We tried. We threw in the towel.
Oh, what do you expect? The entire site is being run by a series of styrofoam heads with wires attached to it.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. It's all Tandy equipment too. So
yeah.
I just have a question for Mike. If you've listened to our episodes a dozen times, is it like Sergeant Pepper, where you're looking for secret messages that we've put in the episode or something? And if so, have you discovered them?
Right. Inquiring minds want to know. So, but with that, all of our we're gonna skip listener mail this month, because all the comments and corrections were and mail that we got really was going back to the previous episode. And I will say, guys, I mean, we got a lot of comments on this past episode about the specials, and a number of people were looking forward to number 2, part 2. In fact, one person tweeted us and said, when we told them we were going to be recording about Mission to Mars tonight, they said, well, what about Primetime Specials Part 2? I said, well, there's parts 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 we have to do yet. So
tune in next month.
Yeah,
That's
they did a lot of primetime specials.
Yeah.
That was but really annually almost. Or
yeah. And then you throw in some of the 16 millimeter specials and different things. We've got a lot to cover over the next couple of years. So we'll definitely do a number 2 in there somewhere.
God willing.
That's right. All right, so with that, we're going to move on to the audio rewind portion of the program. And last month we gave away the big prize pot, guys. Right, so we're starting new this month. So let's take a listen to last month's audio rewind. All right, so if you guessed Magic Journeys, you're correct. That was actually directly from the soundtrack of the film Magic Journeys, which played over at the Imagination Pavilion in Epcot until Captain EO opened up, and surely a topic of a future episode. But we have a prize to give.
And then it moved where?
Where Mickey's PhilharMagic is right now.
Yes, it was in the Magic Kingdom for like another 6 or 7 years.
That's right, yep. And then the Lion King took over, and now Mickey's in there. So, but we do have a winner this month. Congratulations to Mark Brent, who guessed this month's Audio Rewind Puzzler. You will be receiving the GAF guide, which is the Magic Kingdom guide from that photo company that's got all sorts of great park maps information and attraction information from back, I think it was 1973 or so. So it's pretty cool. We do have a prize for this month. I have a stack of old Disney postcards from the 70s and 80s, so we're going to be giving that away this month if you can guess this month's Audio Rewind Puzzler. If you think you know the answer to this month's Audio Rewind Puzzler, send your guesses to podcast@RetroWDW.com. Entries are due by July 24th, 2017. All winners will be entered into a random drawing to find out who wins this month's prize, the postcard pack. So,
we should mention, since you mentioned the GAF prize from last month, that we talked briefly last month about the photo opportunities that were on Main Street and in downtown Disney from the photo companies, old timey photos and taking your photo on a backdrop of the caboose of a train. We did get a few people who wrote in to us or tweeted at us about that and remembered getting the pictures. We did not get any of them that accompanied an actual scan of the photo. So it seems like a lot of people have them buried in albums and whatnot, but
myself
we're still encouraging. We're still encouraging anybody who got one of those photos on Main Street or in Lake Buena Vista Shopping Village back in the day to send it to us, because we would love to see them and feature them.
Now we've got to talk about our prize pot. So we gave away the first half of the year prize pot last month. So it's July. We're kicking off the new second half prize pot, the summer fall prize pot here. And I've got the first item to add as a Life magazine from October 1971. That's part of what David Eppen had sent to us a few months back. So thank you, David, for adding that into our collection and add that into the prize pot. So if you're a new listener, if you're not too sure how the prize pot works, basically all entries that are received for the audio rewind between now and the end of this December episode are automatically entered into a drawing for the prize pot. Each month we add another item, and our scribe here, JT, gets out a piece of paper, writes it down every month, and tells us what we've got. So you've got this one jotted down there, JT?
New sheet of paper. We are ready to go, keeping track. Although last month they did not mail the sheet of paper, so I apologize. But it's for my records. This month we'll mail the sheet of paper.
Fair enough. All right, and again, if you know the answer to this month's Audio Rewind, send your entries to podcast@RetroWDW.com. All entries must be received by July 24th, 2017. All right, well, it's time to dive into our main topic and how you have been biting at the bit for a long time to do this episode, I know. We're going to be taking our listeners back to Flight to the Moon and Mission to Mars, and we're also going to be talking a little bit about the special film that we're going to be releasing when this podcast comes out, that I don't think anybody has seen it since that attraction is closed, and nobody has ever seen it in that level of clarity before. So this is your episode. I'm going to let you take it away, and let's talk about it. Let's go.
Let's do it. Let's spend 2.5 hours talking about a 5.5 minute ride.
You got 45 minutes.
So I am looking forward to this. It was one of the rides at Walt Disney World that I personally absolutely hated once I got past the age of like 7 or 8. So
you're the perfect guy to lead us on this journey.
Yeah. Well, and I completely expected to just spend my entire time just ripping this thing to shreds. But the more I went back and thought about it and listened to my recordings and looked at some of the videos, I realized there was it may not have been presented in the best way, but there was actually a lot of really cool stuff going on. And maybe it was more appreciated in the 70s when it came out than, in the 90s when the thing finally died. But, there's some good meat there. So we'll talk about that stuff. I think what we need to do a little bit is talk about the origin of the show because, or just what it was. So Mission to Mars was a show that would give you a simulated rocket trip to Mars. But it started out in Disneyland as a show called Rocket to the Moon. It was either opening day or nearly opening day attraction. Nearly open day. It was sponsored by TWA and it opened on July 22nd, 1955. So you would walk into this very kind of unique shaped modern building, and then you would go on a crude simulation of a moon tour. There's no pre-show. You just walk right into one of the 2 theaters and you watch films projected on the ceiling and on the floor through portals. And the captain would describe what was going on through speakers. And then the in-theater effects consisted solely of a couple of things. So there was there were like air-powered shakers or rockers underneath your seats. So that way when you blast it off, it would kind of like bounce your seats up and down, which was probably a big thrill in 1955.
I was going to say, this is 55, so anything that moved in a theater other than the seat or yourself, right? That's pretty cool for its time.
The level of sophistication here was, not fantastic. It was basically like two films projected, at the same time with some audio. And some doors that would open and shut. And then there was also this kind of groovy instrument panel that was on the wall with dials that would move during the show. So that would pretend to show you like the ship's velocity and direction and the distance from the Earth and its attitude, which is that fancy word for tilt. So during the show, when the captain would talk about the fact that the rocket was tilting forward to like show you the moon, it's like the little dial would move to show as if like the rocket was tilting, and I guess that made it more realistic. But it was, for 1955, I'm sure that was a lot of fun. People really liked it. TWA was the sponsor. So because of that, the guests were seated by ladies in space stewardess garb. And oddly enough, that tradition of having women working as cast members continued right up to the end. It's like occasionally there would be guys in there, but for the most part it was ladies the entire time, which was kind of interesting, kind of like a reverse of the Jungle Cruise.
It sounds like it should be like something from Airplane, the sequel, like with Trans World Airlines,
Yeah.
And they're all welcome aboard with the white zone.
There's never stopping in a white zone.
Don't tell me which zone is for stopping and which zone is for loading.
Listen, Betty, don't start up with your white zone again.
Yeah. You know what? They probably did something not too dissimilar from
Exactly.
that.
Yeah.
So that version of the show changed sponsors in 1962 to Douglas Aircraft, who made DC-8s and all kinds of fancy airplanes like that. So I don't know why they wanted to sponsor a rocket ride, but they did. And then finally in 1967, when the rest of Disneyland's Tomorrowland went through a big revamp, that version of the show was pretty much demolished. And a much larger, rethought, and expanded version of the show with a pre-show that included a trip to Mission Control and larger theaters with enhanced effects came into play with a new name called Flight to the Moon. So that is the show that we got in Florida. But we were actually not supposed to get that. And I will explain.
So one other thing to add in too is that the Moonliner is probably one of the most recognizable Disneyland landmarks that, it was this almost like a Bugs Bunny V2 rocket with the TWA logo on it and the landing pod doors coming down with a super pointy. I mean, it was, that's one of those things that if it was, you put it on the landmarks like the LAX terminal or the terminal at JFK, just an incredible piece for its time.
Yeah, and there's a tinier version of that now that's still in Tomorrowland and Disneyland. It's not as big as the original one, and I want to say I saw some crazy thing where they made 2 of those moonliners, and one of them ended up on the roof of some, I can't remember now, some manufacturing plant or something someplace. So there's,
oh really?
Yeah, there was still this other one hanging around somewhere. It's pretty weird. But yeah, it is definitely an iconic, to use that word properly, I hope, Disneyland thing, and was it was a huge piece of Tomorrowland, and there were several model kits available too through the years, so you could build your own moonliner and have it home, should you choose. I know a guy in Sarasota who has, I think, 2 or 3 different sizes of models, so
that's cool.
It's pretty nifty. So as great as it was not supposed to come to Florida. So here's the deal. So while Walt Disney World is being developed, this thing called the Apollo program.
Apollo Creed.
More Rocky every...
Apollo Creed meets the Italian Stallion. Sounds like a damn monster movie.
Every podcast we gotta get Rocky.
His goals were to beat up Rocky and get to the moon. whichever order was worked for that. While James Brown sang "Living in America."
I want you.
So that Apollo program was in full swing in the late 60s. So unmanned launches began in 1967 of the Saturn vehicles, and by time Walt Disney World held its formal announcement press conference in October of 1969, both Apollo 11 and 12 had actually landed on the moon. So flights to the moon as an idea were surpassed by reality a couple of years before Walt Disney World was supposed to open. So subsequently, Disney really didn't want that attraction in Florida. When RCA signed a contract with Disney to provide computer systems, there was an attraction that was supposed to be built called Computerama. And I have seen a couple of older park maps that showed this Computerama attraction in the space where Mission to Mars would ultimately go. What we know about Computerama is that it would show guests a little bit about how RCA's computers were used to control and monitor the Walt Disney World Resort. So does that concept sound familiar to anybody?
Oh, the
Astuter Computer Review.
Yeah, so that same concept ended up, it took another 20 years, but it ended up getting used for the Astuter Computer Review. There's also a interview with Marty Sklar in an old issue of the E-Ticket magazine, which unfortunately I don't have anymore, so I can't tell you which issue it is, and I wish I did have it so I could tell you. But he actually mentioned pitching another concept to RCA that would take you on a trip inside of a computer, sort of on a microscopic level, using
like Tron.
Yeah, kind of like a pre-Tron,
like Body Wars, but
because this would
computers.
Yeah, because this would have been in the early 70s, and you would basically use that mission to Mars, or I should say the rocket to the moon kind of idea of like the big round room with screens on the side, and you would take this trip through the computer. But they didn't go for that either. So I think his hope there was if he could get RCA to fund it in Florida, then they could take that ride to California, and they would be able to update that at some point too. But that didn't happen, and instead RCA went on to sponsor Space Mountain, so we got Space Mountain instead of Computerama. So I guess that was ultimately a good trade-off, but that meant that we had to have something else. So Flight to the Moon was hastily added to Tomorrowland, and it opened unsponsored, because apparently McDonnell Douglas at that time, Douglas was actually had a merger with McDonnell Aircraft and became McDonnell Douglas. Yeah. So perhaps they didn't feel like sponsoring something in Florida made any sense. I don't know. So Flight to the Moon opened unsponsored on December 24th, 1971 as a clone of the Disneyland attraction. And it remained open only until April 15th, 1975. At that point, it opened as a D-ticket attraction, but it actually got bumped down to a C-ticket by 1974. So it was clear that they were trying to do something to get people to go in there. Maybe it wasn't as popular as they hoped it was going to be.
That's really interesting because, it kind of feels like whatever went into that space followed that same pattern, starting off big and just falling down, that's kind of interesting.
I'll tell you, I think that format of a room with like the big round room with seats around it and then kind of something on the floor and the ceiling is kind of a curse. It's like until someone is willing, an Imagineering is willing to go like, no, we just tear out that space and do something else in there completely different. It's like everyone just keeps trying to go with that same format where you sit down and it's.
I think part of it is that people are willing to go into a theater for a film. People are when you go into what look like ride seats, attraction seats, they expect to move and do things, and that everything that's ever been in that space, it's kind of a disappointment.
Yeah.
Especially if you've waited in a line for it.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually have a recording where we get through the pre-show and then there's this guy in front of me with his daughter and the doors open up and he goes to walk into the room and he's like, oh God, not this again.
I forgot about this one.
He had ridden it in California and probably when it was Flight to the Moon and didn't realize when he got into Mission to Mars that he was going into the same thing again. So yeah, it's pretty funny.
What about the infrastructure? I mean, the infrastructure can't be that hard in there, but it is sunken down, so that area would have to be filled in, right? Because you enter at ground level, so there is some infrastructure challenges. Maybe not that they're insurmountable, but it is a unique shaped theater. It's a unique shaped building. We don't know what the rest of it is around it. When you're dealing with circles, it's hard. You have to figure out how to knock those two things down and do something in that oval space, if you will.
The discussions I have read about, armchair Imagineers, if I was in charge, what I would do, one of the most interesting ones I read was someone talking about connecting the two spaces, because you could connect them beneath where we walk to make it one actual moving attraction, where ride vehicles would be able to go between the two buildings of what is now Monsters, Inc. Laugh Floor and Stitch.
There's a lot of space back there. In fact, I think one time I tried to look and see, just for fun, it's like, could you have actually fit Mission Space inside of Mission to Mars? And I think to an extent, you actually could have put a limited number of those Mission Space style spinning vehicles like within that area. Since Mission to Space is in some ways kind of like the next generation version of the Mission to Mars ride. So
only the screen is 1/10 the size and there's only one of them.
Right.
And the Mission to Mars doesn't have barf bags.
That's true.
No. Well, it might, but for a different reason, just because you're
oh, that's terrible,
sick of riding it. So
heyo.
Yeah, anyways, so Mission to Mars opened up along with Phase 2 of Tomorrowland in summer, June 7th of 1975. And it continued to run unsponsored until 1981, when finally, for some reason, McDonnell Douglas acquiesced to sponsoring it. And they sponsored it for 5 years and ended sponsorship in the fall of 1986. And it ran unsponsored then from 1986 until it finally died. So pretty weird. So to give you an idea of where it was located, it was on the left side of the concourse where Stitch Encounter is today, as we've been talking about, under one of those beautiful giant spires that we all like to look at pictures of. The building's large open ground floor basically had huge windows that would go from the ground floor up to the second floor. JT was talking about it earlier and said it reminded him kind of like an old shopping mall.
Yeah, it's big glass, like, and then it's just very like when I think of it now it seems that 90s Tomorrowland. Back then it just looks like a mall.
Yeah.
And now it's just like all completely covered over. I think you go in, it's like that blue gray or something like that. It's just
you can't see anything.
You can't see anything.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like that. It reminds me like the breezeway. You know, the double.
Well, think
glass.
about that too. The double glass. If you guys have ever been to, the launch center over at Kennedy, that has a very odd angle double story glass to it where they launch. So it's almost kind of replicating that.
True.
That area where you're going into. So it's pretty. It was pretty cool.
I think it was just very. That was the very modern look at that time. So it was kind of neat because as you walked up to the building, you could actually look inside and see the people waiting. And you could tell how bad the line was just by that. And you could also see the brightly colored alternating walls that those areas in Tomorrowland had. So there was sort of like a orange stripe and a yellow stripe and a pink stripe, and it would go up to the top floor. And then there was kind of this interesting like wavy thing going on the ceiling. So that was pretty groovy. So as you walked up to the actual entrance door, kind of where the entrance door to Stitch is, there was a countdown clock attached to the ceiling that would show you the time remaining until the next Mars flight. So I think that was a pretty neat feature, but I want to know, were any of you ever enticed in just based on the fact that like, oh, it's only 3 minutes until the next one? So
absolutely, you're pulled right in. I mean, that's there's a couple attractions I think that still use that technique, if you will.
Country Bears.
Yeah, listen to the Environmental Fable uses it.
Yep.
Time take that. Were those Nixie tubes? Or
no.
Was it a flip? Was it a? I couldn't flip.
It was the. It wasn't the flip style. It was actually the kind where the segments. Like if you pictured a clock with LED, not LED, just sort of like brightly colored plastic segments.
Yeah.
Like somehow the plastic segment that would form the number would turn on and off.
Oh yeah. Okay, I know what you mean. Yep.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, I don't have a better description of that. Yeah, the 70s flip thing would have been really, really cool.
I swear I remember seeing Nixie tubes in the attraction somewhere, but I could be mistaken.
There were a lot of different lighted things in Mission Control, certainly. So it might have been there. So cool. All right. So you were lured in by that. So it worked perfectly. Yeah, because it's a lot of times I go into things like Impressions de France or the Canadian 360 show, and I'm like, how much longer is it until the thing starts? So
Canada has that like bar graph thing.
Yeah,
that goes down.
Yeah, that one's cool. But you got to know where to look for it. That's if you know it's there, then you can see it. All right. So entering the waiting area, finally, you can see 3 doors directly in front of you. And really the only entertainment that was to be had were a series of backlit photographs of Mars in these hexagonal light boxes that kind of stuck out of the side of the wall, which I'm sure was awesome for 1971, or I should say 1975. Or you could kind of look up, and every so often you could see a people mover go by because that glass went all the way up to the second story. So the people movers could look down and see you waiting, and you could see them waiting.
And at this time too, Mariner 1 had landed on Mars, so some of these pictures were fairly, recent, or you may have not seen them that large or that up close. So this was, even though Apollo had passed its prime, so to speak, still putting something on a Martian planet was still very exciting.
So yes, as a matter of fact, that's what I was just going to mention next, because there was actually a plaque inside the waiting room that mentioned how NASA had cooperated with the development of the ride, and it talked about how a lot of the photos came from the Mariner 9 program. So yeah, you were dead on.
And you wouldn't have seen that unless you had National Geographic or something. There was no internet to look up Google images.
There were a lot of pictures in there. They're of varying sizes. So I mean, it was enough to sort of keep you engaged while you were waiting. But it kind of reminds me a little bit of the of what they're talking about now with the queue-less systems, because it was just a big lobby and you could just kind of wander around the lobby and look at stuff. You didn't necessarily have to just stand in a back and forth queue once you're inside there.
Well, it's the same room now, right? With Stitch, where you just watch that TVs in there. It's a
Right.
big room.
Yep, exactly the same. So that kept that look probably until McDonnell Douglas took over the attraction. And at that point, the backlit photos were replaced by just kind of larger flat photos with pictures from the Viking mission, because in 1976 we landed two Mars, well, not rovers, just like landing craft on Mars, and kind of created a national sensation. So we got a lot better pictures of Mars at that point. So they didn't update the main show, but they did kind of refresh the pre-show area there. So when your countdown timer at the end of there was a countdown timer also placed in front of the doors, so they're always trying to keep you cognizant of like how long you had until the next show. When that reached 0, the automatic doors would open.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? When we leave this area in a moment, be sure to take along all your belongings, including your imagination.
So there might have been a little hint that maybe what you're going to see was not going to be super awesome.
Let's pretend.
Yeah.
For a moment.
Yeah. So you would follow the crowd through the doors, and then past a curve, down a little curved path, and then into a tiered pre-show area. So much like the Tiki Room, or the same way it is in Stitch today, it's like there were levels inside of that. So the people in the back would be able to see over the people in front of them, and those people would be able to see the people in front of them, so they could watch this exciting pre-show.
That really served a purpose too, is because it forced people to separate, not crowd, give them a view. And later on, as we talk about when you went into the theater, it controlled where you were going to go, into the rows in the theater. So it was smart design, I think.
Yeah, you could let. I think they would probably let one row go, and then let a second row go, and then the third row. So it wasn't like a big rush into the hallways. It's a good control tactic. Just like Stitch, you're standing there, except in front of the whatever the robot is named now. I can't remember. I haven't seen the Stitch encounter, so you'll have to excuse me. I'm a little low on details there. So instead of that setup, you look over and you see what was sort of like this fake mission control, with staffed by audio animatronic technicians, including a woman. They had got the women's lib thing by the mid 70s, so there was a woman scientist in there too, which is good. And just all kinds of fake monitors on the wall, and these huge consoles that they were sitting at. And the monitors were all driven by like 16mm projected films. So there was one main screen in the center, and then kind of like two sets of these smaller screens off to both sides. And each one of those showed their own film during the course of the thing. So there was a lot of activity on screen to sort of catch your eye. Go ahead.
Other than the blinking light, it was really, really detailed. I mean, again, going back to that Kennedy is 65 miles away, I think with NASA helping them, they did a really good job of bringing a smaller scale control center to the attraction. I mean, if you didn't tell anybody and brought them in there, they might think they're in something legitimate.
Yeah. And it's funny too, because there are all kinds of things like reel-to-reel, the reel-to-reel computers that you see in the old thing. So I mean, it certainly appeared to be very high-tech. And I remember off on the right-hand side, there was this neat little sort of like fake hallway, the kind of thing that Disney is famous for. So if you looked on the side, there was a hallway, and there was like some other computers sitting off in the hallway. So it gave you this feeling that there was, something beyond the room that you're looking at that was really part of this mission control center. So it was well done little thing. So inside that center, behind a console, stood the director of operations.
Good evening, space travelers. My name is Sarah, and I'd like to welcome you to our mission control room here at the Walt Disney World Spaceport. Our director of operations, Mr. Johnson, has been expecting you. On boarding your ship, he'll take a few moments of your time to explain about what's going on here today. Excuse me, Mr. Johnson. All passengers of Flight 295 are now aboard here.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Welcome to Mission Control, space travelers. The first part of your trip to Mars today will be directed through this room, and so will your landing when you return to Earth.
In his very famous red turtleneck shirt and silver lame lab coat. That was a hot look.
You
and of
still
course
have that outfit, don't you?
Yeah, that's I
think you have one.
I wear that when I go out on the weekends. Yeah. Now, the interesting thing about Dr. Johnson is the reason he was kind of tucked behind the consoles is because he had no legs. He was a figure only from the waist up. So you never got to see the fact that he wasn't a whole person. And he had a few functions. It's like, of course, he could talk and tilt his head back and forth and eye blink. And he had one arm that he could move around and gesture, but his other arm was just kind of permanently stuck to the side, didn't move around. So he had a limited number of functions. He wasn't like a fully functional figure like today. The one in Stitch Encounter and the one that was in Alien Encounter can kind of move all over the place and go nuts. So I would recommend at some point before it goes away that you should see Stitch's Great Encounter, or whatever it's called. I think that's
Escape.
what it's called. Simply to see the animatronic in there, because it is terrific. The Stitch animatronic is very good.
So does anyone want to take a guess maybe why they named the character Dr. Johnson?
Johnson Space Center.
Yes, I think that's it. I think that is exactly why they named him Dr. Johnson, because before he was named Tom Morrow,
right?
Which is a classic Disney gag.
Yep.
But the Johnson Space Center would have been relatively new, because I believe that didn't happen until the late 60s in Texas. And there was a big fight between Florida and Texas over who should do the actual mission control, and Texas won. So that is still a weird thing, how you launch the thing in Florida.
And it clears the tower, and Texas has it.
Yeah.
Well,
Johnson.
It just goes to show you, yes, how important it is to have the Senate Majority Leader and then the Vice President of the United States, and you happen to be from Texas.
There you go.
And really want a lot of space jobs in Texas.
Yep. That is it exactly. So, Dr. Johnson was voiced by a newsman and Gunsmoke announcer named George Walsh. And a little weird thing about George is, so he had a career in broadcast for years and years and years. He retired from broadcasting. He had done this voiceover work. He had done voiceover work for a couple of Disney films, some shorts, and then did the voice for this. And then he retired a couple of years later, and he said he fixed up his car and did some stuff around the house, and then he got bored. And then he ended up going to a job fair and actually just getting a job at Disneyland, working in some of the stores on Main Street. So he worked for a while at the candy counter, and then he ended up in the Disneyana shop. So you could actually go talk to the voice of Dr. Johnson and Tom Morrow in Disneyland if you happen to know where to go. So that was pretty funny. And speaking of talking to Dr. Johnson, one of the unique kinds of things about this ride is that the live host or hostess would actually have a little banter back and forth with Dr. Johnson as part of the script. So if you were a Mission to Mars hostess, you would, sort of like the way that you would wake up Jose, you would get Dr. Johnson's attention and have him start talking to the crowd, and then throw him some softball questions for him to answer during the course of the show.
Excuse me, Mr. Johnson, would you tell us what it's like for people in zero gravity? I'm sure our passengers would find that very interesting.
And I have heard that occasionally the hosts who were bored would ask sort of non sequitur questions to Dr. Johnson, who would then answer them in a hopefully funny way. His job was to prep you for your journey on flight 295 by showing you the wonders of spaceflight, courtesy of NASA stock footage filmed during Skylab missions. Does anybody remember Skylab?
Yeah, it was right after Apollo.
Absolutely, the first space station.
Yep.
Yeah, there you go.
And that was a unique launch vehicle that was a modified Saturn V. And I always saw that footage. I was like, wow, it's so cool. It's like a stubby version of the Saturn V.
Yeah.
And occasionally you can find pieces of it just falling on you.
So Dr. Johnson, while we're standing around, shows us examples of solar research, a groove being cut into a stainless steel plate in zero gravity, which is, I don't know, that's interesting to somebody. growing crystals in space. Hey, where else do we get to see people growing crystals in space?
That's right. Horizons.
Can't get enough growing crystals in space for my money.
Oh, now that's really lovely.
Practical, too. Just think, materials from space for all kinds of industries back on Earth.
And then we get to watch about 2 minutes of astronauts cavorting around in Skylab, doing various things like lifting heavy equipment. And
I think they did the eating the banana with spinning it, right? Didn't they do that?
Yeah.
One? Showing the banana.
Coming in for, yeah.
Yeah.
Did now how long was this whole beginning pre-show? It seems very long.
It was as long as the ride was long, because it would have to keep you occupied during the exact same amount of time that the attraction was going on next door.
Got it.
So yes, it was quite lengthy. And oh hey, who doesn't need some comedy relief, right? Because it's Disney. So what's the big yuck? A bird. That's right. An albatross trips up the emergency re-entry alarm. Ha 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 ha.
In fact, they're so...
Attention. Clear all channels for possible emergency re-entry.
Oh no, not again.
Stand by. Video signal coming in on all channels.
Just as I thought. Somehow, this silly bird trips the emergency system every time he comes in. And I think he knows the laugh's on us.
And oh
he
boy,
said he gets us every
yes.
time or something like that.
Yeah, he does. That's right.
Exactly. So here's one fun little thing that I unearthed one day when I was watching Disney Channel reruns that I had taped. The footage of that albatross comes from the 1960 Disney short subject Islands of the Sea. So if you ever want to like set up your own albatross video in case an emergency happens and you need to like say get out of a date or something, you can have the albatross go off on your phone and be like, I'm sorry, I need to get out of here.
Got a problem. Houston.
Yeah. And actually that footage of the albatross setting off alarm is still used as a gag today inside Mission Space in the queue while you're waiting. So if you're watching the monitors, that darn bird shows up and still does that. So how about that?
I like that. The fact that they did that is pretty cool.
Yeah, that was a nice nod. So the pre-show ends with a shot of your rocket sitting on the launch pad. And Todd, you and I have talked about how that thing of the rocket on the launch pad actually looks real.
Yeah. I always wondered, like, is that some weird NASA thing? Like, did they actually build this rocket and never launch it? Because there were a lot of weird, rockets over the years. But
yeah,
I assume it was a model. I don't know.
I felt the same way. You look at it and it actually looks so real. I wondered, like, oh, is that some weird thing that they tested that they never?
Yeah,
I don't know. I think it must have been a model, but oh my God, it's perfect.
Yeah, because it's squattier. It's with
4
wider,
boosters around it. There on the side, you see.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's great, but it's got that black and white like paint job, like it's a test thing.
Checkered flag, like test track. Yeah.
Yeah. It's bizarre, but it looks so good. And it looks completely different from the artwork of the Mars vehicle that they showed. Like on the poster when it was telling you that it was coming, and on the poster that was on the omnibuses.
Oh yeah.
Which was like this sort of long, almost 2001 A Space Odyssey looking craft with like two extra rockets on the side and like this separate looking habitat module. So I don't know where that came from, but man, looks fantastic. So you get to see that, and then it's time to get out of there. The door, another set of automatic doors open, and then you get to walk out into a hallway. And as you walk in the hall, you get to pass by this wall with this recessed tableau of a nuclear refueling station, which was kind of, I don't know, it's a neat little Disney touch, not anything super awesome. Had some blinking lights and some tube looking things and some hoses and stuff. And then you go into the main hallway, which actually had this really groovy silver wallpaper that I wish I could get a clear picture of, because it was kind of awesome. And there were doors on the left side of that hallway and on the right side, and there was a sign hanging from the ceiling with arrows that would blink that would basically tell you whether you were supposed to load into the left one or the right one. And then at the end of that hall, you remember those infinity light things that they sold at Radio Shack with the sort of like the white lights with mirrors where it would look like it went on forever
and ever? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they basically had sort of like a large version of that with blinking red rectangles at the end of the wall. So it gave you this illusion that there was this thing that just kind of went off forever at the end of the hallway, except you could see your own reflection in it. So it was never really like a super perfect effect, but it was, groovy for the time. And then you would finally get into the theater. So just like when you walk into Stitch today, you're at the top, and there's 4 rows of chairs encircling the room with kind of like a walkway where you come down, and then directly on the other side where you can go up. And if you looked down on the floor, there was like a big gray circle with a white screen in the middle. And then handrails sort of ran around that. So that way you wouldn't jump on the big screen. Because as Todd, we were just alluding to, if you were to do that, you could actually fall through that screen, probably to your death.
That's right.
Because you're actually on a big floating floor there. The way this ride worked is that there was a large space underneath where you were sitting. And there's a 16 millimeter film projector underneath there that would project the film via bouncing off of mirror, like up into that center screen. And also above you is a big attic space that had another 16 millimeter projector that would project down onto the roof.
And we should note too that they were called the bottom, the middle, and the upper scanners. That's what they were referred to.
Yeah, and then rigging the walls on the 2 sides were up 2 other large screens. So you could get like this nice sort of like widescreen 70 millimeter looking look from the outside, but we'll get into some of the details of that as we go.
I feel like all the videos I've seen on this, and you could comment on this, they seem sort of like very like, it's like, I don't want to say the theming stops right when you go into the theater. It kind of just turns into more of a theater that, like, I don't know, it's really bright and just gray. Is that just the way the videos look?
Well, I mean, the colors in there are predominantly gray and silver. There's this kind of blue corrugated wall that runs around the whole thing, which I presume some of it was for sound deadening. So that, and in fact, the doors that would open and close were like really thick with a thick seal. So I think the idea was to try to not let a lot of sound out of there as you were either in the other theater or in the pre-show. But yeah, it was really super plasticky and like really nothing special. I think it was trying to look, high tech and sciencey. It was not like today's concept of how you design, something, which probably comes from more of that Star Wars ethic where there's like a bunch of panels of stuff on the wall.
Yeah, like junk. It's just clean.
Thing upon thing about thing. Yeah. This was that more of that scientific septic NASA look.
Because there's one picture it flows around, I think D23 or somebody posted, it's black and white and it's of the theater. It's just so like, bleh, like just nothing.
Yeah. There's really not much to it.
No. It's kind of like a giant doctor's waiting room.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. There's one of my recordings, I refer to the room as like the round room of boredom.
Yeah.
To somebody as we're walking in.
And the doors are corrugated. I love it.
Yeah. There's just not a lot to it. And
as you went in, did they make you sit in a certain spot, or like did people clamor for front row, or was it kind of just like nobody knew or cared?
You had to choose a row of your liking and go all the way to the end, filling in each and every available seat. Do not stop in the center.
Yeah, depending on how busy it was. So maybe in the early 70s, they did a good job packing people in, but by the end, you could go wander and find a seat.
Take 3 if you needed it.
Yeah, just lay across them, take a nap. As you walked in, I do remember there was like this green static pattern that would play on the floor screen and on the top screen, and there's just kind of this constant din of like boop 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 that would play in the background. But that was really about all that was going on during load. So So after you picked your hard plastic seat from the 162 available, so you could get 162 people inside that thing, poor suckers, the cast member would give her final cautionary speech, and she would leave the room through that heavy door, and then a display panel above the door would show the airlock, oxygen, cabin pressure, and cabin temperature indicator lights change from red to green. And then a no smoking sign would light up. So that was about the excitement of the in-theater effect up to that point. So you had the red light would shift
just in case you didn't know.
This all sounds so riveting.
Oh my God.
Yes.
It's fascinating.
That was like people, like, was there like sounds and like things shaking at this point, or was it pretty just...
No, there was kind of that, as I was alluding to, kind of that like USS Enterprise, like din just going on, kind of like this low level sound that was constant. That's kind of sounded techish.
Just tech noise.
But yeah, just this noise thing with a couple of beeps and some brrrr.
If you're driving your car at this point and you just heard that, it should make it feel like you're driving a spaceship.
Yeah, that's it exactly. So they would drop the lighting once you were ready to go to draw attention to those top and bottom screens, and then liftoff would commence. So if you look down, you could see fire, and then the ground would slowly kind of pull away. And if you looked up in the sky, you could see the moon, left over from Flight to the Moon, kind of getting a little bit closer. And as you went up through the atmosphere, it's like it would change from like light blue to more of a dark blue, and then finally you'd see stars. If you look down, and I think this whole sequence was probably just pulled over from Rocket to the Moon in California, because you could see this launch complex, and there was this weird looking building that was the shape of the 1955 Flight to the Moon building. So I'm sure all that was just left over, and they just continued to use it over and over again. I was always remember kind of disappointed. Is like I expected to be seeing like Tomorrowland in Florida.
Right. Yeah. Instead, this silvery triple dome thing, almost like a Mickey head with these other launch pads off the side. Yeah, it's kind of odd.
Hidden Mickey.
Yeah.
Yeah, before they knew it. Yeah. So
now I asked you this before the show, but like that the video in the center, everybody could see that.
Yeah. So for the most part, the seats were built as they are now, kind of like stadium style. So you could look down over the head of the person in front of you, because your head was about as tall as the headrest. Depending on where you were sitting, it's like that railing that kind of ran around the outside that would keep people from falling down. It's like that might get in your way a little bit. But yeah, everyone had a good view of the floor, which, I mean, there's nothing more exciting than going into the room and like watching the floor for like 5.5 minutes.
And then I'm going to ask this, or I'm going to say this just because it's some people might not know I'm playing dumb here. There were no like restraints like they have now that go over your shoulders.
No.
If they did happen, it was just because you wanted to get up and leave. It would just
just to hold you
giving
in.
real meaning to the word restraint.
Exactly. They should have had them, is what you're saying.
Yeah, they should have.
There were several times when in the 90s when we would go on, like Hoot Gibson and myself, and you would see somebody get disgusted and get up and leave and head to the door, and we'd be like, "No, it's an airlock! You'll kill us!" Now here's why the seats didn't have any restraints. So let's talk about the seats, because they did have one thing. Yep. So as the rocket would accelerate, the seats would begin to push up. And the concept was that it was attempting to simulate G-forces pushing you down into the seat. So since they couldn't do that, they would actually push the seat up into your butt.
Yeah.
to try to trick you into thinking that you were getting pushed down.
And then when the engines cut off, they let go, so it dropped, so it felt like you were,
that's clever.
Yeah, or maybe it was reversed, but whatever. Yeah.
No, that's it exactly.
And the whole room shook too, right? The whole room was on springs or something. The whole
Really?
thing, I remember rattling like crazy.
No kidding.
Yeah.
So did you ever feel like that was an effective illusion?
Just the seats?
Of the seat?
Well, I mean, the fact that you felt like you were being pushed in, I mean, was it effective? No, but I mean, you had to add the rumbling of the theater, and you had to add, the air bladders in the seats, because I guess we said earlier, you're staring at a screen.
Was the floor really rumbling, or were you just tricked?
I remember the floor actually rumbling. I remember the whole thing.
How?
So the rumbling comes from a little innovation that they threw in there that we are very familiar with now, called sub bass. So they actually had huge bass woofers in there. And this might have been the first attraction that we ever experienced, or even anything that we experienced that had really low bass in it. And they would use that to do the rumble. So, that actually I think might be a trick pulled out from like those 1950s castle movies where they would have things like simulate earthquakes and stuff, but using like rumbling bass. But yeah, that was a whole part of the trick. And there were also some flashing lights and stuff inside to to give you a little in theater effect. But the whole thing was very crude by today's standards, and which is why by the 90s it's like people were just not having any part of it at all. So once you're into orbit, Third Officer Collins comes over, he's our guide for the adventure, and things kind of perk up a little bit.
Attention, please. Folks, this is Third Officer Collins speaking. I'm your tour guide today, and I'll be telling you about what's going on during the trip.
Do you guys know off the top of your head what very famous Disney voice actor was the voice of Third Officer Collins? We have talked about this gentleman before several times on the podcast.
Is it Pete Renaday?
It is.
Hey,
it is Pete Renaday. That's right, Captain Nemo and quite a few things. So yeah, he was the voice of Third Officer Collins, who takes time out of his busy day to show us around Mars. He draws our attention to the side screens. So we have these wonderful side screens in this ride, and one of the really cool things, which just kind of dawned on me, is at first he's showing us a wireframe animated model of the solar system.
On the side screens, our ship's computer has drawn a diagram of our solar system, and we'll tip it over and move in closer so you can see where we're going.
Now, here's something that I did not consider literally until this afternoon. This show was produced in 1974, probably to premiere in 1975. And these graphics are actually all computer-generated animations done in a wireframe style. So this has got to be one of the first uses of CGI for entertainment purposes. Because I remember seeing Star Wars and like the Death Star plans. It's like that was in 77. And I read that they reused part of an animation of a hand that Ed Catmull, who would later lead Pixar, created in like 72, and they stuck it in Westworld in 75. But like, this is 1974. This is really, really early. So it's like somebody was working with somebody in order to do that. And now I'm really fascinated because there were only 3 or 4 places in the United States that were doing any kind of computer graphic work like this at that time period. So now I really want to find out who it is, because I think there's a really interesting story buried in here somewhere. So that's cool. So all the fancy graphics are there to explain how difficult space travel was back in the 70s and 80s.
For example, spaceships had to follow a curved path for about 8 months to intercept Mars when it reached a certain spot. It was like having to hit a golf ball in California hard enough and accurately enough to make it go through one particular window of a train arriving in Florida that much later.
And as Third Officer Collins finishes, we make a jump to hyperspace, which was kind of how we could do a Mars trip in a very quick amount of time. I mean, if you know anything about moon flights, it takes, 3-4 days for the Apollo ships to get from the Earth to the moon. It was a multi-day process, right?
You were the one of us that was really alive and cognizant at that time. How?
But it was 3 days to get from the Earth to the moon.
Was there no fast pass?
There was absolutely not.
But it's always funny in literally every movie, because it's a movie, like Despicable Me. It's like everything. It's like they take off from the Earth in like a minute and a half.
Well, if you watch any of the Looney Tunes, they would just get on the top of a rocket and light it, and then just shoot themselves right into the moon, and would be fighting each other on the moon. Next thing you know.
Yeah, and Superman got there real fast too in Part 4.
That's true. He got the nuclear weapons up there.
Yeah, and Sun Man, what was his name?
I don't know. It was so bad. It was so bad.
Was it worse than Mission
like
to
Superman
Mars?
4, The Quest for Peace? So bad.
Poor Chris Reeves, man. He got duped.
Oh.
Soup got
what,
duped.
what did you ask? Was it worse than Hal?
Oh, was it worse than Mission to Mars?
I only saw Mission to Mars once, so I don't really recall it. You mean the movie or the attraction?
I guess both, maybe.
The Tim Robbins movie?
Yeah.
I thought it was Gary Sinise, wasn't it?
I think he's in there too.
Yeah, I only saw it once. Weren't there like monsters on Mars when they got there or something? It was
They're aliens.
so crazy.
Yeah. But maybe that's why Gary Sinise ends up in Mission Space.
Yeah, he's the space guy.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that started with Apollo 13, didn't it? Wasn't he in Apollo 13? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He's also in the kidnapping attraction in Tomorrowland. Ransom. Never mind.
I've met him, by the way.
Oh. Yeah. Where at?
It was at a charity function about 10 years ago here in the city in Philadelphia, and he was the guest of honor, and kind of hung out off the stage, and he came off, and we shook hands, and at no point did I think to mention
anything good.
Well, I didn't think to mention Mission Space to him. You would think that would be the natural thing I would bring up, is not one of his films, but hey, you're in that Disney attraction, and I guess at the time I was a little more restrained on those topics.
I know you really would have wanted to say.
Now when I meet anybody, like if I ever meet Patrick Warburton, the flight guy from Soarin', that is, I'm not talking Seinfeld with him. I mean or Family Guy. The first thing I'm bringing up is nice work, pal.
Mm-hmm. When you hear the words "go for launch," you're gonna want to hold on.
Yeah.
I actually did hear a story that somebody met Gary Sinise and asked him about working on Mission Space.
Yes, I've heard this story too.
Yes.
And he was really hungover, right?
Yeah, he was totally hungover during the filming of it. Like, he flew in to do it, and he had almost forgotten. In the story, the person was talking to me, was like, "Oh yeah, that's right, I did that." And he was talking about how he came in to film it. He was totally hungover from the night before. And if you look at his eyes in the video, it's like they're really red.
So that leads to two asides, which have nothing to do with this, but I feel compelled to throw it in here to put some variety in our show at the moment. The first is the story of the guy who played Anakin Skywalker when they take the mask off in Return of the Jedi. And he's a famous English actor, and he shows up to shoot at that one day scene, which was very secret on the set and everything. And so he runs into Ian McDiarmid, who is Emperor Palpatine, and they know each other. And he says, "Oh, what are you doing here?" He says, "I don't know, some sort of science fiction thing." He's going to be Darth Vader without the mask on. But the Disney related story, so I've been catching up on Gilbert Gottfried's podcast, which he's done for like 3 years. Great podcast where he interviews all these old Hollywood types and whatnot. Today, they happen to be, one of the ones I was listening to today, they start talking about Thurl Ravenscroft. And so Gilbert starts to recount how Thurl Ravenscroft was in the Kiki room. And he's like, and I recorded this thing where I'm supposed to be with this other bird taking over the thing, and Thurl Ravenscroft is doing this, but he can't pronounce Thurl Ravenscroft's name, and he keeps calling it the Kiki room, and it's just hilarious because I'm like, oh my god, everybody on this podcast, their head would explode if they heard him calling it the Kiki room and not the Tiki room.
Getting back to this very important topic of the attraction, as Third Officer Collins finishes up, we make the jump to hyperspace, which puts a psychedelic slit screen tunnel effect on the top and bottom screens. It's like incredible. You can't tell from the videos that are out there because it's all washed off, but it's this crazy thing with like oranges and blues and pinks. And well, I guess actually once we release that film, Todd, people will actually be able to see it in full glorious Technicolor.
Exactly. 16 millimeter glorious HD. And it's you put it on a loop. It's pretty trippy.
So plays this real wonky sound as we're going through hyperspace, and it flashes a lot of lights in the cabin. And then once over, we have arrived finally at the planet Mars, which is visible on the top screen. Yeah. So we're here for a tour. So the ship launches 2 drones. How about that? They had drones with cameras on them. They accurately predicted the future.
Attention all stations. Outer lock is now open. Stand by to launch camera drones.
Those small unmanned rocket ships you see leaving us will shortly be sending back television pictures as they fly near the surface. But we'll continue our view from orbit also.
And they, from what we could tell, and we'll talk about the film a little bit later, but I believe they're models. That's what they're models with this flashy animation, exhaust and propellant flames coming out the back, which is for a time it's pretty cool.
I can't even tell if they're models or they're actually just like photographs of models
that
are animated.
Yeah,
it's
animated
really that one is kind of cheesy. But yeah, the whole flashing flame effect is weird on that.
Yeah, nothing can burn and where there's no oxygen, but well, we digress.
Yeah. But what's interesting, the design, like, it's very reminiscent of the black hole in some ways, of like some of the robots and things. So I wonder if George McGinnis was involved with just those 2 little ships or something. So anyways, yeah, we're digressing like crazy. So with those ships launched, Third Officer Collins takes us on a brief tour of some of Mars's interesting features, like the Mariner Valley, which is the Martian equivalent of the Grand Canyon. And they have this one part where they have a superimposed outline of the United States, like put on top of this Mariner Valley, so you can see that it's so big it would stretch from coast to coast. Yeah. And we also get to go see Olympus Mons, which is the tallest known volcano in the universe. So another cool thing that was done for this is Disney actually built a huge model of the volcano that was big enough so they could fly a camera up the side of it and then down into the caldera. And I know I have pictures of this somewhere with the people that build it. I saw some sort of article at some point in my life, and I'm desperate to go try to find it because it is really cool, and it's a big model. It was not small by any stretch of the imagination. But one of the really funny things about this, so there's this very smooth glide up the side of the volcano and down, and then the probes are knocked out of control by a shower of what they call meteoric particles, which I don't know if that's fancy science talk, or if it's just ridiculous. I can't decide. But the way that the graphics work, where the probe that you're watching on the side monitor gets knocked out, you can tell it's like a color thing, and then suddenly it switches to black and white, and the picture kind of like starts shaking back and forth, and then it flips upside down. And we at one point I was able to get a hold of one of the films of this effect, like the actual 16 millimeter film that they ran, and you can tell at the point where it gets hit, they actually switched to a still picture of the last frame of that sequence and just waved it back and forth in front of the camera and spun it around. It was, but it goes quick enough in the attraction that
it's dark, it's grainy. Nobody will ever know.
Yeah, you can't really tell, but oh my God, that was so funny. So after the probes get knocked out, They tell you they have to be careful, and then quickly those meteoric particles hit the ship. The oxygen system is knocked offline, it goes from green to red, and then we have to quickly make an emergency hyperspace jump back to Earth and land safely exactly where we took off.
It's much like SpaceX.
Exactly like SpaceX.
Just like SpaceX.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is your exciting trip through Mission to Mars. You get off, the doors open, you get off, and you walk into a hallway that actually had fantastic wallpaper. And this is another, I was like, I don't know what it was, Disney and walls in the 70s. But man, the wallpaper that was behind that door when you go into that exit hallway was freaking awesome. And I need to find more pictures of it because they would make great desktop patterns and things. Right. And then you go out. If you were in one of the rooms, you would, and Stitch is the same way today. So you come out kind of in the front side of Tomorrowland, and so when you walk out, you're sort of facing the castle, and then you walk back. If you come out the other side, you kind of wind your way inside of the building, and then come out between the gift shop and the entrance where you walked in. That's right. So Mission to Mars, that lasted until New Tomorrowland. So it closed, I believe, on October 4th of 1993. Let me make sure that's right. Yep, October 4th, 1993. And that made way for another attraction that would be known as Alien Encounter, which has its own fascinating history. And I guess in a couple of years, maybe we can talk about that.
That's right. So, I mean, Mission to Mars, it's interesting that it lasted that long, almost 20 years. Considering how there was no real upgrades during, I mean, I think some of the dialogue changed over the years, and some of the footage, wasn't it changed a little bit now and then?
No, I mean,
no,
I mean, I guess the thing is, it was probably really cheap to run. All they had to do is switch out the 16 millimeter films when they would break. There was basically the most sophisticated audio animatronic was Dr. Johnson, but even he had limited functions. The other audio animatronic figures in the control room had like maybe one or two movements at the top. They were not sophisticated. So there was, and even if they stopped working, you probably couldn't tell.
It's really a shame Bob Iger wasn't in charge at some point in like the late 70s. We might have gotten a Cat from Outer Space attraction.
Oh my God, I remember that movie.
Yeah. So, yeah, it kept chugging along, and ridership went down and down and down and down. There are stories of them, over the course of time, they were continuing to try to figure out what to do about it. I don't think they wanted it to die. Or at least let it get too stagnant. There's this really funny story that Bob Rogers told on an episode of the Seasons Past podcast.
Who's Bob Rogers?
So Bob Rogers, thank you. Bob Rogers is a former Imagineer. He was employed by Disney during the period of time right before Epcot opened, and he worked on their films. So he was responsible for Impressions de France, and I think a couple of other small things. He has a very on and off career with the Disney company. He has a lot of really funny stories where he would get hired and fired and hired back again and fired again and hired back again and fired again. But the last time he was fired, Marty Sklar immediately hooked him up with GM, and he worked on Trance Center. So The Bird and the Robot and The Water Engine, those are all films that he was in charge of. So during one of the times when he was actually working at Disney, probably when he was hired, but not working on Epcot films yet, or maybe he had finished one of the Epcot films and is trying to work on the next one. He got put on a project to try to come up with new ideas to do something with Mission to Mars. So he and his writing partner were coming up with all kinds of crazy ideas, like trying to have tentacles like reach into the room. And he spent about 6 months, he said, working on different ideas to try to revitalize the show. So they were kind of actively trying to think of something to do with it, because again, I think the Imagineers had realized, like, okay, we're stuck with this big round room. What do we do with this big round room? Although later on, when he finally did get put on some of the Epcot projects that went forward, he found out that the whole Mission to Mars thing was just like a place that they could put Imagineers who weren't working on any other projects, so they'd have a place to charge to.
Yeah, I remember you telling us, or somebody sending us that story where they would code everything to.
That's right.
Yeah.
To working. I think it was in Marty Sklar's book or somewhere. There was maybe Raleigh Crump's book. I forget. There was a book I read that in too.
Yeah, but I suspect, there probably was. I mean, they don't want to let something just sit there and languish if they can help it. So there were probably some attempts over the course of time to do something with it. And, it finally took until the 90s. But yeah, my God, that show ran for 20 some odd years somehow.
Yeah. Look what's there now. I mean, we're pretty close with.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah, that's true. Another 20.
Yeah. I think Stitch actually had gone longer than Mission to Mars in that space. And that's still kind of mind blowing.
Yeah.
But I still attribute that early 90s Tomorrowland. I mean, I remember as a kid, it was pretty lame. There was, you just kind of skip everything, go straight to Space Mountain. At least I did. Like, Star Jets were sort of like dated looking. Delta Dreamflight wasn't much. It just was kind of like all due. But that's mine.
Oh, the ironic thing now is that the Star Jets would be incredibly retro. Would be awesome out there. But that tale for another day. But why don't we talk about the film we have, guys, right?
What's up with this?
So we've been hinting at this for a long time, so it's time to tell everybody what we've got. We were able to acquire the actual film from the upper scanner of the Mission to Mars attraction. And this piece of film, fortunately, was actually never used. It was recovered, and this was one that was in storage and never was put on the projector. So we were able to obtain it. We scanned it in, and we scanned it at high definition, and we matched it as best we could to the soundtrack, and it came out really, really good. I mean, as we mentioned earlier when Howard and I were talking about the drones, you realize how cheesy some of the effects were because you never saw it in this clarity. You saw that 35 feet above you or 20 feet above you on a ceiling and on a grainy projection screen. So it's a real treat to be able to see. This is probably the only film so far that we have that was actually in an attraction, and it's the 100% authentic footage from the show. So we're going to release that. It's got the soundtrack on it. It is the upper scanner, so there's a lot of sequences that aren't overly interesting as they... there's just static on the screen or the launch or stuff like that, but it's still a very, very rare piece of history. So I think all you guys have seen it so far, and we're going to let everyone else take a look. So we'll post that up. We'll include it in these show notes. We'll also do a separate announcement and posting of it, but it came out great. Well, Hal, thank you very much for that walk down Tomorrowland history lane there. I remember the attraction fondly. I really enjoyed it. So, but what do you have in store merchandise-wise to commemorate this? Do we have anything coming up?
Yeah, so we gotta have some Mission to Mars T-shirts because
gosh, that's cool.
If you're gonna do this, God bless all of you for sitting through that because
I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people have never really realized this was there. You know what I mean? Like it's at least people my age or around that.
Yeah. Well, the vast majority of our listeners, came up probably. I think they fondly remember Alien Encounter and were disappointed that was taken out. So yeah, I know a lot of you, the listeners out there are definitely not of this time period. We'll come up with something cool and appropriately retro.
Excellent. So for all of you out there, if you're interested in seeing any house designs or all the designs we've done in the past, you can go to RetroWDW.com/support us, and all proceeds from all those T-shirts, mugs, stickers, laptop covers, you name it, they're there. All proceeds help to keep the show on the air. And as always, our pins are available at RetroWDW.com/pins. Guys, before we close this out, I know we kind of have a schedule for the remainder of 2017, and next month is a pretty big month, taking people back. Should we tell them where we're going?
You should tell us where we're going.
Well, it's in the schedule. Aren't you looking at the schedule, Brian?
I am not.
I'm not either.
All right. Well, we're going to take a little trip on a magic journey through imagination next month.
Oh boy! So we're going to journey into your imagination with Figment, the second version.
Journey into imagination, the original, the best, the one and only.
So Figment, Dreamfinder, that whole deal, all this.
The whole thing we've got in the playground, all that stuff.
JT, you're finally going to find out what the hype was all
so
about.
If you are
That's
not
right.
subscribed to us, you probably need to do that now. Like, hit it up. Make sure you get next month because that's a big one.
That's
Figment.
Right. It's a big one. It's a big one.
And whatever we do, we will not do it justice.
We just call this one Figment. That's, man. Epcot. Going back to Epcot. That's huge.
Well, you know, it's funny. One of our old episodes is called One Little Spark, and it's all about the history of Epcot, and it gets tons of listens. But I think half of the people are just like, "Oh, this is about turning to imagination." They get 10 minutes into it, and they're like, "Nah,
screw these guys."
It's like the movie Best Defense with Dudley Moore, and I'll never forget when the movie came out. Eddie Murphy was like the hottest thing in Hollywood at the time, so he is in the movie for 45 seconds. They put 20 seconds of that in the trailer. So everyone went to the movie to see it, expecting it was like an Eddie Murphy's in the Army movie. And he was literally like, what you saw in the trailer is about half of his total time in the film.
That's pretty funny. So, all right. Well, next month, we'll take you back to Journey into Imagination. And as always, thank you to all of our listeners for listening. If you can, give us a shout out and a review on iTunes. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, give us a shout at podcast@RetroWDW.com. And we'll see you next month. And with that, Brian, take us out.
Follow Todd McCartney and Retro Disney World on Twitter and Instagram at RetroWDW, on Facebook at Retro Disney World. And for all things Retro Disney World, including exclusive merchandise, visit us on the web at RetroWDW.com. On Twitter, you can find our producer, Jason Bartell from Deepwater Studios at JasonDWS, our announcer, Andre Gardner at Andre Gardner, and follow our hosts, Hal Bowers at Go Away Green, for JT Kuzier at LS1JT, and you can find me on Twitter and Facebook at Brian P. Miles.